Welcome to episode 6 of The Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. What did Jay Leno, Giacomo Agostini, and the first woman to ride her motorcycle around the world have in common? They'd been photographed by David Goldman, a rock and roll and documentary photographer who abandoned Los Angeles to pursue a two-wheeled passion project. Goldman is also a hardcore rider, racking up 50,000 miles in the past 3 years alone. He's the real deal. I'd also encourage you to watch the video of this interview on YouTube, where you can see his photographs for yourself. But before we dive into our conversation, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles in a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Shall we take the plunge? David, tell me about this photography project you're doing, photographs of motorcyclists. Where did this idea come from?
So the motorcycle portraits started I'm not really a fan of this word, but honestly, I don't know how to say it any other way, very organically. So I'm a documentary and portrait photographer. I got my start in the music world, shooting album packaging, but I transitioned more to documentary work. I was doing a project in India for UN Women on human trafficking and maternal health and violence against women and stuff. And I was seeing all these motorcycles, just tons of motorcycles. And it had occurred to me how in developing countries, motorcycles are used as a utilitarian tool. And in developed or Western countries, it's really a luxury item. And I kind of wanted to explore that in a documentary way. And I had been using a lot of different technology to tell my portraits. I use audio and GPS and virtual reality and motion and stills and all these elements. And so I just kind of got this idea to do portraits using my motorcycle as a mobile photo studio, and to just start photographing people who I described whose lives are deeply connected to motorcycles. So builders, racers, collectors, and world travelers. And that's kind of the impetus. That's how it started. And it was it started very humbly. And I would just reach out to, somebody on Instagram, and maybe they would respond. And I was lucky. I knew some people at some brands, and I had some introductions. But that's really the genesis of it.
What is your connection with motorcycling, photography aside? What's the connection for you?
Well, I ride. When I was 16, so I grew up in Toronto. When I was 16, I wanted a car. My parents weren't going to buy me a car. So I said, well, I'm going to get a motorcycle. And they were not so keen on that. But it was basically a battle of wills with my mom. So I did the motorcycle course. And anyway, I went and I bought a bike. I used some bar mitzvah money, and I bought a bike on a long weekend, an old, I think an 82 GS 550 ES or something. And I bought it off this guy, and I drove it home. My mom followed me home, and all weekend long in the summer, it didn't work. It was fucking dead. And I was just like pushing it. I'm wearing my leather jacket, and I'm sweating, and I'm dropping it. Anyway, my mom was like, that's it. Monday, or after the long weekend, on Tuesday, we're taking this bike back. He's gonna take it back, and we'll pay for insurance for a car, and you can use that money to buy a car, like for what you spent on the bike. So I bought this 1978 Honda Accord that looked like it was shot with rust bullets. It was just riddled in rust bullets, and I didn't own another bike until 10 or 12 years ago. But I had rented when I lived in LA. And I rented it like Harleys in LA sometimes. I'm not a big Harley fan per se, but to drive up to Laguna Seca, I'm a big car racing fan. And I rented a bike in Barcelona and went down to Valencia. So, they've always kind of been in my peripheral, but I was a Formula One car racing fanatic since like the 80s. Never a motorcycle thing, but motorcycling, sort of like everybody says, it sort of gives you this freedom to travel, and so and I like it. I like that you can get your hands dirty. And as a photographer, I sort of have given up so much of the so much of my life was sacrificed to focus on my work as a photographer that I didn't really get to buy the tools to mess around in the house, and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. But I've always been I was always a bicyclist, and I would work on my bikes in the basement. And so it's sort of a transition. I can get my hands dirty on the bike and feel like I'm being somewhat productive. So there's that versus a car.
It's interesting you talk about your mother being opposed to motorcycles. I sometimes feel bad for young people whose parents support motorcycling because they don't get that definitive, autonomy that you gain from sort of standing up and drawing your line in the sand and saying, "Well, this is my thing, folks."
Yeah, like if it's given to you too easy, you don't appreciate it.
That's exactly it. So did you actually? I've seen photographs of you and your bike, and it looks like you've done some pretty serious riding. There were some photographs you sent me in Portugal and elsewhere, and so it seems like you've done. You didn't just adopt motorcycling to justify this photography project, that you actually were or are a pretty hardcore motorcyclist.
Yeah, before I started this project, so I was living in New York, and I had a friend in Toronto who had a CB400F Super Sport, a 75, I think, and I went to college with him, and I would always be like, "Rick, do you want to sell that bike to me? Do you want to sell that bike?" And he was like, "No, no, no." And I didn't own a bike. I'd only, like I said, rented a few times. Anyway, my stepfather passed away, and I was in Toronto, and I asked Rick again, "Do you want to sell that bike?" And for whatever reason, he said yes. So I bought the bike, and I rode it back to Brooklyn from Toronto. And it's not a comfortable bike. And when you haven't really ridden in a long time for more than just, a week or whatever, I was a little intimidated. And it's not a powerful bike. Anyway, I rode that bike and it sat in front of my apartment. And people would walk by, older guys would be like, "Oh my God, that was my first bike." So many people told me, "That's my first bike. That's my first bike." And I really dug it. But then I had another photographer friend of mine who had Triumph Thruxton. I can't remember the year. I feel like a 94. It was the last of the carbureted ones, but still of the newer version. And anyway, he sold it to me for the exact same price that I sold the CB for. And so I had this Thruxton, which was, a 900, super cool. Like, you looked cool on it. It was all black with the white checkered paint strip down the tank and everything, and with the cowl. You just look cool. You're wearing a leather jacket and Red Wing boots and whatever. And so I had that for a long time. And I rode it all around, in Brooklyn and up to Toronto a couple of times, not comfortable. And then only when I moved to California, I moved back to Toronto. So I exported that Thruxton back to Canada. Then I moved back to California, and I exported it and imported it again to the States. And then when I decided that I wanted to do the motorcycle portraits for real, and I wanted to do a proof of concept, I was like, I can't do it on this Thruxton, even though I wish I still had that bike, but I couldn't afford it. I just, even though I didn't sell it for too much. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to buy this. I need an adventure bike, and I'm not so tall. And the price was right with the KTM 790. And that was it. I bought the KTM 790. So this is my third bike. And I've been riding, pretty full time essentially for 10 or 11 years, something like that.
But is it true that you, judging from the photographs, so you ship the same bike all over the world, wherever you want to ride, essentially?
Yeah. It's, sometimes I just get something in my head, and I'm very proactive. As a photographer, I'm always trying to figure out ways to do stories and stuff. And I remembered that, I moved out to Nova Scotia, and I was working on this house. And one day I thought, man, I'd love to go to Europe, because I had ridden the bike around the US and Canada. I should back up a little bit. So my mom passed away during COVID, not from COVID, but it was very difficult for me. And like many people, sort of dealing with the grief. And I just got on my motorcycle and I rode. And I rode for 4 months from LA. And I rode around the southern US and into Canada. And I basically did this loop of the US and Canada. And then when I got back to LA, I didn't want to live in LA anymore. So I bought a house in Nova Scotia, and I was working on the house for a bit. And I thought, I wonder if I could go to Europe. I wonder if I could just continue this trip in Europe. And I thought the only way I can do this is if I get an airline that will sponsor me. So I just started reaching out to airlines, And I'm kind of lucky in the sense that as a professional photographer, I have I've photographed some pretty well-known people, and my work is like, it's good work, whatever. And so I can show a potential client or a sponsor that I'm not just like a guy who wants free stuff. Like, I can really deliver. Anyway, so I reached out to WestJet, an airline here in Canada. And after some back and forth, they agreed to sponsor me to be a partner, that I would be an ambassador for them. And they flew me and the bike to Dublin last summer, and home from Paris. So it was, really cool. And I've done over 50,000 miles on that bike. It's a 2019. I bought it in 2020. And I haven't even barely ridden it in 2024. So basically 3 years, I put over 50,000 miles on it.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. David Goldman talks about riding around America for 4 months after the death of his mother to clear his head, which got me thinking back to a time when I snuck away. I had a week, which to a newly separated father with a 4-year-old felt like 4 months. I put 2,000 miles on a Ducati 916, and as pretty as the 916 is, it's a dreadful street bike, but not for the reasons you may think. I actually never found it uncomfortable. The problem is that a Ducati 916 only really works properly above 100 miles per hour, which is extremely unhealthy for your license. Now, that daughter of mine, who was 4 at the time of that trip, is going to be 20 really soon. And the Ducati was a bike I thought I'd never sell, right up until I sold it. It's a bike for a time, for me anyway, that's passed. Today, the bike sits in a collection on the second floor mezzanine. It's not ridden, and while in this collector's possession, it'll never be ridden. It'll never make a sound. But if it did make a sound, the stories it would tell would be my stories. And now a word from our sponsor. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Now back to my conversation with David Goldman.
I wanted to show the inclusiveness of motorcycling. I wanted to show men, women, black, white, straight, gay, and every variation thereof. I had this sort of hypothesis that there is a greater esoteric connection that people have to motorcycles than just like, yeah, I like to ride, like that there is something deeper. And I wanted to do these. I wasn't going to be able to find that just from a photograph. So that's the reason why I incorporated audio interviews. And I didn't know what the story was going to be. A lesson that I learned a long time ago, I went to Ethiopia and did a project on obstetric fistula, which is a birthing injury where the baby dies 100% of the time and the woman is often left incontinent. It's really awful, and it's totally preventable in a society that has access to medical care. But I was struggling with what story I wanted to tell. I had this idea that I wanted to tell something, but it wasn't coming to me. And kind of the greatest lesson I learned in that project was to allow the story to present itself to me, not for me to try to sort of manhandle it and force something to happen. So as I started to ask the subjects these questions that in the beginning I hadn't really finalized, but over time they've evolved into 3 basic questions like, how did you get started with bikes? What's a great experience you've had with bikes, and what do bikes mean or represent to you? And with those 3 questions, I have received like myriad types of answers, empowering and fear and strength and accomplishment and togetherness. That is something that tells a greater story. Yeah, it's a motorcycle, but arguably it could be anything. It's a connection that people have. And so I think it's fascinating to hear people's very oftentimes emotional stories, which sometimes I'm not expecting. And some like big tough guy starts to cry, or a woman tells this story about sort of recognizing her own strength that she didn't even know she had, mental and physical. So yeah, that's kind of what it's all about for me.
What would it be for you if you were to answer the same questions that you ask other people? What would you say? What's your what's your go-to?
For me, motorcycles in my life are the only thing that I can draw a parallel to a camera, because as a documentary photographer, my camera acts as a key that gets me into communities that I would normally never have an opportunity to come to. People trust me, they share themselves with me in what I would call like in a very intimate moment to allow yourself to be photographed. And I find that the motorcycle is very parallel to that, because people share stories and communities open up, and you roll up on a bike and people just talk to you. Sometimes that's amazing. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass. I have a friend who has a joke. He wants a sticker to say, "Just because I have a motorcycle doesn't mean I want to talk to you." So, which sometimes I get. I just want to ride. I don't want to talk to everybody all the time. But that's what it means to me. It's a key to community and to people and learning about cultures, and it's a great leveling.
David, we have a few of your images here, and I'm just going to pop them up on screen, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about them.
Sure.
Let's start here. Who's this?
So that's Jamie Nelson. Jamie is an incredible woman. I enjoy so much spending time with her, but I didn't know her, 10 minutes before I rolled up to her door to end up doing that photograph. I saw her on a little video clip on the Vintage Inn, Paul d'Orland's site. And I sent him a message and I said, "Who is that?" And he's like, "Oh, that's Jamie Nelson." I'm like, "Do you know her?" He goes, "Just send her a message." Anyway, so I shot her a message, and I was living in Nova Scotia, and I didn't know when I'd be back in LA. But anyway, she's like, "Yeah, come on down." So the next time I was in LA, which was not too long after, a couple months, we agreed to meet, and I came to her house, and she lives in this pink house in the valley, and it's hilarious. She has penis door knockers, and she has penis shaped bushes out front, like Edward Scissorhands, but penises and stuff. And when you open the door to the house, it looks like a 1970s porn site. Like, it's very 70s and very pink, and shag carpets and white pianos and chandeliers. It's really like, the attention to detail is incredible. It's second to none. So the door opens, and like, she's beautiful. I kind of like couldn't talk for a second. You kind of get dumb. I thought she's beautiful anyway, but she's also a very good photographer. She's not just like some Instagram sort of lazy photographer. She's technically very, very good. Anyway, door opens, we start talking, and she says, "I always wanted to do this shot where I ride my motorcycle out the front door down the steps." She goes, "But none of my friends are really confident to if something goes wrong." She says, "Would you be into doing that?" I'm like, "Fuck yeah, let's do it." And so we basically take that bike. Obviously this is the portrait, but we take the bike inside, and she has that kind of velour rug. We roll it out. She's into all these smoke bomb things she's holding, and she rides the bike out the front door, down the front steps, and it was so enjoyable for me, because it had been a long time since I had collaborated with somebody like that. Many of the people, and it's no shade on anybody, but many of the portraits are just sort of like these, they're builders or whatever. They're not creative in a visual way, in a kind of a funky way. They're awesome people and whatever, but this was, I didn't even know this person, Jamie, and we had this incredible sort of collaboration, which I hadn't done since I had, used to shoot rock and roll, and I would make these big sets and all these characters and stuff. So that's kind of the background to that, and it was just a blast, and I got so many great shots from. This is just one, and oftentimes I only get one or two good shots that I really want to use, but for her, I have so many, and I have video. And last month I was in LA again, and she's working on a chopper with this guy Messiah for the, oh God, I can't remember, for a big show in California. And so I went out with them to see the build, and that's going to be, I mean, oh my God, they're kind of collaborating. He's building it, but she's sort of giving her input on how she wants the bike to be. And when they unveil that bike, which I've been watching the build on, people are gonna fucking, it's gonna blow their mind. It's crazy, this bike that he's doing. Anyway,
Did you happen to see either Liberace or Elvis in her house, by the way?
To see, well, yeah, she's hiding Elvis there. She has a picture of Burt Reynolds, like full hairy chest and stuff in one of the bathrooms. It's hilarious. She has a heart-shaped bed. She has like this red tub, sort of jacuzzi tub, and yeah, it's wild.
Burt Reynolds, when men were men. Let's move on to another photograph. Tell me about Elspeth.
So Elspeth, she's this iconic woman, one of the first British female riders to travel solo around the world. And I had reached out to her. I was presenting my images last year at the ABR festival, which was really cool. And I had reached out to Elspeth, and I knew she was going to be talking there, and she was very kind, and she agreed to do the portrait, but we kind of agreed that the ABR might be like too crazy and too many people. And a lot of people want to talk to her, she's a bit of a celebrity. So she invited me to come to her water tower. So she's an architect. She did this ride in the 70s. I can't remember when, late 70s, early 80s. I can't remember. But it's interesting with her because she did this ride. She tried to pitch it to magazines and, book, and nobody really listened to her. Nobody cared. And she thought, maybe it's because she's a woman, and if a woman tells a story about traveling around the world, it's just going to make all these other dudes feel like they're losers. And so she couldn't get any traction. So she basically just became this architect, and she works specifically on really wild buildings like water towers and converts them to homes. So she had me at her water tower, which is, I mean, it's incredible. And just walking up and down the stairs is bonkers. But so this is the bike that she rode around the world, and she couldn't have been nicer and taking the time. I'm always amazed at these people who don't know me. They just, they just share their story with me, and not like she hasn't shared her story previously, but it was, it's a testament to the kindness of many of these people, and to just listen to her tell stories is great, and she was wonderful.
Let's move on. Austin Vince.
So I'm not embarrassed to say I had no idea who Austin Vince was. And I'm at the ABR, and so many people would say, "Oh man, you got to photograph Austin Vince. You got to shoot this guy. He's incredible." And I'm like, "Who is he?" He's like, "Well, he's this teacher, and has the greatest sort of control of the English language. And he does these kind of like old school kind of rally, oh my God, what do you call it? Like kind of like a poker run type of vibe, scavenger hunts in the Spanish mountains, like in the Pyrenees and stuff. I think that's where it is. And you go on sort of enduro bikes, and you go and you find all these little sort of scavenger hunt maps and whatever. Anyway, they say he's an incredible guy. So he had like a display at the ABR to promote his company to do these rides. And anyway, we just sat and talked for a while, and he's just a really neat guy. He's like that's his shtick with his one-piece jumpsuit and stuff. I didn't get to, I don't know him very well. I certainly didn't spend a tremendous amount of time with him, but I found him to be incredibly engaging, really funny, very, very, very smart, and kind of just doing his own thing, which is very cool.
So David, you've confessed you're a huge Formula One fan. I'm a huge motorcycle road racing fan. And as icons go, they don't get much bigger than this man.
Yeah. Oh my God. Giacomo Agostini. So a year and a half ago, I saw on the Instagram feed for Team Obsolete that who has Dave Roper, who everybody told me I had to photograph Dave Roper. And anyway, I saw that Agostini was going to be in Brooklyn at this kind of Christmas party. So I reach out to Team Obsolete, and I ask if is it possible that if I come there that I could photograph Agostini. And Iannucci, the owner, he says, if you come, you can photograph him. Now, I don't know this guy. I don't know the Team Obsolete people at all. And I had to, and normally I'd say 85% of the time I ride my motorcycle to the subject. It's part of the deal. But I thought, man, if I could photograph Agostini, this guy's huge for the series. Like, what are the chances? Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I take the gamble. I go down to Brooklyn. I meet Agostini. I photograph him. I photograph Dave Roper. And it's awesome. And Agostini says to me, I told him I was maybe coming to Europe the next summer. I wasn't even sure, but I thought maybe I was going to. He goes, well, if you come to Europe, you come to Bergamo, you come to my museum. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll come to me. Yeah, okay, man, no problem. He gives me his email, and that was it. Then I find myself in Europe, and I send an email to Agostini, it's like getting Ayrton Senna's email. It just was crazy to me that this was even happening. I really, honestly, it blew my mind. Anyway, they're like, well, when are you going to be here? Da, da, da. Anyway, we agree on a time. I roll into Bergamo. I have no idea what this museum means. I don't know if it's a private building. I just have no idea. Anyway, I go up to his house. I sort of wind through this little narrow road, these old houses, whatever, and the gate opens. Or I buzz the thing at the gate, and I go, hey, it's David for Giacomo. He's like, okay, you come on in. And I come in, and I roll up, and I've got this bike that's just loaded to the nines, traveling around. And he looks at me, and he thinks I'm crazy. He's like, I cannot believe you driving your bike around the country. It's amazing. He's crazy. And I'm just like, I can't believe I'm sitting here. He goes, he's like, come on in. You want some water? So I'm sitting at his kitchen, and he's getting me some sparkling water. I'm having like an out of body experience. Anyway, and then he shows me his museum, and he's got this museum that basically it's like a bunker in his property, because when you look at his lawn, it's just like you're driving up, but it's like a bunker underneath the front lawn because it's a hill. And he has everything. He has all his old bikes and helmets and trophies, like all the trophies. And he's just like, there's another guy there sort of hanging some framed photos. And I'm just like talking to Agostini, like we're just hanging out for a couple of hours. And I do this other portrait of him. And the portrait that I had done in Brooklyn, I liked. Okay, if I never had another chance to meet him, I'm grateful I had that portrait. But I really wanted to get him in his own place, and outside of having him on a track, this is pretty cool. So yeah, so Agostini, I mean, I don't know what the hell. It's bonkers.
And for those people that maybe don't go back as far as Agostini, he was Valentino Rossi before Valentino Rossi. So I think that's the best way to frame it. Yeah, and still the winningest road racer ever.
Yeah, the single most successful motorcycle racer of all time. And he's still like very active, and and he's in his 80s, I think, now.
He's looking awfully good for his 80s. There's hope for all of us.
Yeah.
Not that we'll age that well, but we can hope. Now, here's last photograph, a very interesting woman who, and I wrote this quote down, she claims that she drives like shit on a motorcycle. So
yeah.
Who's this?
So this is Anne-France Dautheville, which you can see by the name. This woman is the first woman to ride solo around the world. I can't remember how I got her email, but another person that I reached out to before going to Europe, she lives out about an hour outside of Paris, and she's in her 80s, and she doesn't ride anymore. But I reached out to her, and I explained what I'm doing. And I should go back. I've wanted to capture, like I said, men, women, black, white, straight, gay, all of that. But I really also wanted to capture these people, these sort of older people, who are really important, who the young, whether they know it or not, are really standing on their shoulders, right? younger women of today who are traveling around the world, they owe it to people like Anne France and Elspeth. Those are the giants that they're standing on. And so Anne France, oh my gosh, she couldn't have been nicer. She was so funny. She says in the email, she was like, of course you can come, you'll stay with me. But she says, I go to bed. She says, I go to bed very late. So do not call me before 12 o'clock or I will shoot, And I was like, okay, no problem. And I tried to meet her in her town, but she doesn't. I think there was a power failure at the moment that I got there, so she didn't have access, and she didn't have email at that moment, and she didn't have a cell phone, so it was really hard to meet up. We ended up meeting in Paris. She says, "Meet me at my dentist, and then we'll go to the place where I meet everybody, at my bar." She's just, I don't know, like I was so happy to spend time with this woman, and she's so alive and she's so inspiring. I just love her. I love her.
I always think that there's some thread that unites motorcyclists, and it's not the cliched hair in the wind, wind in the hair stuff. There's something else, and it seems like and I didn't even realize this till a few years ago, but most of my friends are motorcyclists, and even people that don't work in the business. They might be filmmakers, they might be home builders, but surprisingly they are motorcyclists. So what is there a central thing that unites all of us?
There's a scene in the now canceled Woody Allen from Annie Hall where he gets pulled over by a cop, and the cop asks for his license, and he takes out his license and he goes, and he rips it up in front of the cop because, like, I have a problem with authority. And he kind of does this. And I feel like there's something about that. I think people that ride bikes, not that they're always thumbing their noses at authority, but I do think that they're a little bit less inclined to take everything at face value. I think that they want to have experiences. And there's a scale, right, for what people will do and what they won't do. But I do think there's something about that you don't want to just toe the line in life, and you want to live and have experiences. I don't think people want to kill themselves. I think they realize there's an inherent danger to motorcycling that doesn't necessarily present itself in other forms of transportation, but the trade-off is worth it. For what they get out of it, and I think that is something that connects us all. I think, again, some people are going to be more rebellious, but I do think that there is that there.
You've mentioned, David, you mentioned your mother's death, and that you took 4 months to go riding around. What did you learn in those 4 months on the road about yourself, about grief? Is there anything you can share from that?
Well, I think what I learned about, you can't run away from grief. That's if you've lost somebody close to you, then that it's kind of, there's this invisible line. And there are people that are on one side of the line who've never had that experience. And there are people on the other side of the line who have had that experience. And I remember, and I'd lost my dad and my stepdad, but that didn't register at all. I mean, it registered, but not in any like really palatable way. And then when my mom died, I feel like it rewired my DNA. And it made me think about anytime when somebody like a friend of mine had lost somebody, and I'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," but I don't think I knew what I was saying, And now when I'm faced with that, I have a completely different sense of responsibility to that saying. And, but I just think as a freelance photographer, I didn't have it in me to be hustling for work. I just was like, I was out of juice, and I had the luxury, very grateful that I was able to inherit a bit of money. Like I said, that I didn't have to work in that period of time. I have to work now, but I didn't have to work in that period of time. And I know many people don't have the luxury to step back from the responsibilities of their life. And also I don't have, I'm single, so I don't have responsibilities to a partner or to kids or anything. I could really just deal with my own head. And I know that many people don't have that luxury. Perhaps there's a benefit to not having the freedom. Maybe you can just focus on your own life and your kids and your wife or your partner or whatever the case is. So you don't have the time to think about the loss. I didn't have that luxury. I had the luxury, the other side. So I don't know. You just deal with however your situation is. And that was my situation. And it's still, sad, but I look around and I think, well, I would never had the opportunity to do that trip and meet the people I met and live where I live and have these experiences. And all these experiences are all on the back of previous experiences. So yeah, it's tough, but it is what it is.
For more of David Goldman's work, visit the David Goldman Photo on Instagram or davidgoldmanphoto.com. And David would like me to remind you that his work is copyrighted. In closing, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love. You transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.